Thank you, Chris. Appreciate it. Good seeing you. All right, ladies and gentlemen, if we can take our chairs. See how well-trained you've become over the years? People know that the second time we say, can we take our chairs, we start using individuals' names. And I found that once you use one person's name, Stacy, everybody else flocks to their chair because they don't want their name called. So we're trying to get everyone, all the panelists who are going to be up here until noon to come join me at the stage. Let me make sure that I have those. My job is short and sweet here. I have, between now and lunchtime, we will have 3 panels. Our job going forward for most of the rest of the day is to explain to you the contents of the document. We're taking them 2 elements at a time. Forgive us for being so routine, but remember our goal is to communicate to you the contents of this document. As Ron said, we are now in comment and ballot period. It would be inappropriate for us not to really, we would love to just talk about the concepts. I think the whole committee would, but we need to tell you what's in the document. So with no further ado, I would like to introduce, I don't know if it's Brianne or Stacy who are going to, Brianne is coming up first, talk about our first 2 elements in this document, leadership and management commitment and stakeholder engagement.
Okay, yes, thank you. Right.
Perfect.
Excellent, okay. All right, great. And as Jeff mentioned, each of us are going to talk a bit about each of the elements and what the RP says for the element, and also try to give a little bit of color and context for the discussions that we had around the element and why we think it will help advance safety and the reason why it's in the document. So we'll start with leadership and management commitment. If you're familiar with most management system standards, they have management commitment as an element. However, we wanted to go one step further and really emphasize the leadership component of that, which can occur at many levels within the organization, and we'll talk about that a bit more in a second. It's not necessarily positional. This element, and this is kind of outlines the very basic requirements, the fundamental requirement, and the operator must have a pipeline safety management system with all of the respective procedures and processes. The operator must set objectives and goals. And then there's also a number of specific expectations for not just management, which most management systems have, but also for top management and employees. And I'll read real quick the definition. We've defined top management as a person or group of people who direct and control the organization at the highest level. And management is a bit broader, which is a person or group of people as defined by the operator who direct and control all or part of a facility, location, department, or other function, have fiscal responsibility for the organization, and are accountable for ensuring compliance. And for some operators, top management and management are the same, particularly for some of the smaller operators. So essentially, we've left it flexible enough that the operator can define what is top management and management within the operator, but trying to make a distinction because a lot of management systems don't ever reach sort of that top management level of engagement, and we think that that is a really important core piece of what we're trying to accomplish here. And we also talk about employees and their role. Also, as we think about the expectations around leadership and management commitment, there is an expectation to take actions to promote and build a positive safety culture. And safety culture is critical to making the management system work. If you have all the greatest procedures in the world, but you don't have a culture that supports the use and following of them and people to raise risks and the fundamental behaviors that you want to have, then you just have a bunch of procedures on a shelf. And so one of the things that we think management has to do is support that safety culture and promote it. As I think Ron mentioned earlier, there's a whole section at the end of the RP that talks about safety culture and each element's how it interacts and promotes safety culture. But we very much decided as a group, after much debate, not to make an element called safety culture. So you'll see that woven throughout the document, but there is no element element fundamentally called safety culture. And there's also the emphasis here to ensure the making communication and risk reduction and continuous improvement routine. And there's some specific recommendations with a lot of flexibility in the RP around how management and top management could go about doing that, in addition to what is your traditional management review type thing. So the diagram here is shown in the introduction to the document. And what I would say about this is this is a suggestion, and it is an example. The elements around the outside are put in the PDCA form where, as a committee, we generally thought they went. However, again, keeping with the flexible idea of the standard, within your own company, you may put those elements in a different part of the PDA cycle. You may think it's more of a check than a do, and that's okay, and that's part of the intent. However, the committee did really feel that the core here is the leadership and management commitment, and that really has to be at the center of what we're trying to do. In particular, leadership on all levels around communication, ownership, and engagement. And one of the reasons that we felt like this is that we really felt that leadership can happen at all levels. As we sat and looked at some of the tragic accidents from a number of industries that helped fuel our thinking, and we talked to a lot of outside experts from beyond the pipeline industry. One of the things that was very clear is that in some of those accidents, there was some employee at the front line level that wasn't in top management or often even in management who did have an indication that that risk existed. And whether it was not raised or not acknowledged or not addressed, there's a lot of different variations on the theme. But we really wanted to emphasize that leadership is not just about the people who have the titles at the top, that leadership is something that happens at all levels of the organization, and everyone has a role to play in that. And so as you look through the RP, it does outline expectations of folks at all those different levels in the organization, and that's a really core element of what we're trying to do, and it's quite different than a lot of other management systems out there. So that's one thing I would just emphasize, it's folks to take a look at that, and particularly if you have some comments on some of the things that are outlined in those sections through the balloting period, we'd like to see that. What I'd like to do now is turn this over to Stacy Gerard to talk about how we see this element contributing to the advancement of safety, and also talk about stakeholder.
Good morning. This is the part of the day where we're emphasizing, the why. Why do we put so much emphasis on leadership? And I think that all of us have had the experience of taking apart accidents and doing the debriefs and listening to the leaders of the company say the words, "If only I'd known." In my experience as a regulator and working with Jeff, the many occasions where companies would come in to talk about their performance, it was amazing the gulf that we would sometimes have to cross between what frontline people would say about their work and what people at the top would say. And so our experience of the last couple years talking to high performers in other industries and looking at what really worked for them over and over again, the story about the real involvement in leadership. And thanks to Ron for so much emphasis on the word routine, making safety at the top, the review of the progress in driving down risk, routine. So as we looked at where we'd been when we started out, we kind of looked at where we'd been and where we wanted to go to be at a par with some of these other industries and their standards. One of the areas where we thought had greatest opportunity is in the area of safety assurance, a big, formal, stronger, functioning safety assurance element. Not that we didn't have it within the pipeline industry, that there were certainly parts of it within the industry, but the banding of it together under the header, safety assurance, was the statement that in the Plan, Do, Check, Act model, much formal emphasis on the check phase, much more strong. And the awareness of what is going on in the check phase to go all the way up to top management on a routine basis. So we believe that there's a lot of progress to be had in the leadership at the top having a much more, to quote a famous friend of mine, granular focus. Andy, I'll credit you for that. Much more granular focus on what's going on in the area of driving down risk. The KPIs and the data. I think when we look back on where we've been and where we're going, making progress in being more specific about how you define how you're driving down risk, and maybe before the risk, the threat. And not just looking at the mechanical side of it, but the human side of it, and any place organizationally where this can happen. The concept of maturity model is something we've borrowed from some other industries, and we've focused on it as a tool that serves many purposes: planning, strategizing, decision-making, but consciously making choices as the leadership, the management, the employees look at where within our system and our subsystems are there places where we really have some opportunity to tighten things up, look at things that could become a threat, anticipating, to make choices over a long-term period and say, over the next couple years, let's choose to work in these areas. Let's make our data analysis more robust. Let's work on empowering employees who put a great deal of emphasis on personal safety and bring them forward to a role in asset management and giving them more of a voice so that we can transfer all those things we do in personnel safety to managing the asset. Something that, to me is surprising at how safety usually resides in the personnel safety area. So in the maturity modeling process, making some conscious decisions, checking periods of time to accomplish, going back and looking and seeing how you're doing in that period of time, and then having out your goals that you move on and check back to see your progress with them. And then this maturity model is a great tool for communication within the company, stakeholders, regulators. How are we doing with our plan? What do you think of our plan? What do you think about our choices, about why we've chosen to do these things first? The maturity model as a new focus for strategic thinking and checking. Incentives was one of those areas where the sound in the team up and down quite a bit. Some of us, who remain nameless, really pushing for the use of the word incentives in this document because people pay attention to what they get rewarded for doing, and people especially pay attention if it's what the top leadership gets rewarded for doing. So the good guys, I think we're victorious here, right? And the word incentives is in there, but there's a lot of ways to create incentives. And I think the subject that Acting Chairman Hart was talking about today, about the mixed messages. I'm patting you on the back because you found a way to get production really up there, and I don't care how you did it. But at the same time, I'm telling you safety is really important. To find some way to bring those things together so that always the message that safety is as important as productivity is always there. So incentives is a way to do that. And lastly, the ever talked about subject of the safety culture. There was a time when we didn't think the word safety culture would actually be in this document. Then we had a chapter to talk about it, and in the end, we came to the conclusion that it's a leadership function that must happen to look at the safety culture. What do people think is important in safety today? Why do they think that? Do they believe that you, as the leader, are credible when you say that safety is that all-important value? And so many other questions, and probably the most important of them, do they feel comfortable bringing problems forward? And has the leadership created that environment where they know that when something's broke or a system is, a procedure in a system is being deviated from, that they would come and tell you, I've deviated from this thing 100 times, here's why I did it. And I know you're going to understand I did it because I was trying to do the right thing. Have you created that atmosphere? And assessing safety culture is one of those functions that we think absolutely needs to be done.
Useful for something.
I think a little more than that. The stakeholder engagement, Brianne mentioned, and I think Ron mentioned that we made it number 2. And bringing it up to the second element was more than symbolic for us. We have learned through any number of experiences, not the least of which was damage prevention programs and the Common Ground Alliance and sharing responsibility, that sharing the responsibility for driving down risk is everybody's, inside the company and outside the company. If you know something about the environment around that pipeline, if anything about it is changed or going to change, anything that you see or know about that pipeline, there's somebody in the company who wants to know that. And so what we've said with stakeholder engagement is it's really important to make it easy to talk to the company, easy to know where to go into the company, easy to understand why that information about driving down risk is important to the company. And there's always those among us who are concerned about revealing too much information about how are we doing with risk management? What is our focus in the next couple years in risk management? We have come to believe that stakeholders need to know big picture, high level, what that rationale is, because it will incentivize them, motivate them to feel they need to come forward and be engaged with the company for the positive, constructive purpose of helping drive down risk. Our view of the stakeholder is a positive construction. Which one was it? Okay. So, as we talk about these 2 elements, leadership and stakeholder engagement, the why here is to be sure that you've got the most engagement going on that you can, inside and outside, with any employee and any outside stakeholder, neighbor, landowner, government representative who has some engagement with your company about anything, most notably emergency preparedness and strategic planning for catastrophic events. There needs to be that understanding and awareness of where you're coming from, what your modus operandi is. And we want to call attention to the word engagement. We've done awareness. We've had 1162. We hope we've created awareness, but awareness alone doesn't necessarily change people's behavior. And we've heard the Pipeline Safety Trust say that for years. We're about changing behavior, identifying problems, what needs to be done, being part of the solution. That is what engagement is, and it's a step beyond where we've been. I've emphasized the positive purposes. I asked Brianne to be sure to put the word transparency on this slide. Commenters to the first draft, some of the public commenters have asked for more in the way of engagement and transparency. And our movement from the draft to the one that we put out for ballot does include the requirement to have a contact for concerns about transparency of information. If you as a stakeholder can't find what you want, there should be somebody you could say, I need help finding this out. And so I have to say that I think that this standard has moved a long way in going to toward the place where public stakeholders would feel like they can get access to the information they need, that they should feel motivated to help work with the company to drive down risk, and that they should be able to understand the intent of the company, its overall strategy, and how they're hoping to improve performance, and how they judge performance. We specifically require that the company makes clear how do they gauge improvement in performance in driving down risk. So we look forward to your comments. We're pretty sure this is an area you'll have a lot of comments, and we will take them very seriously. Thanks much.